Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of The Nationalist View. And today we are diving into a story that sits at the crossroads of espionage, technology, and geopolitics. The recent arrest of US strategist Ashley Tellis has reignited debate over Chinese spy networks and how far they have penetrated America's policy and tech circles. And if we add to that the Times investigation and explosive investigation into so-called the sex warfare in the Silicon Valley, so the picture, becomes even more complex and murkier. So joining me today is Major Ben Lowsen, a noted China expert and somebody who has spent time in Beijing as a military attaché, is an expert in Mandarin and China-related affairs. He also advises U.S. military on China-related issues, and he will help us to unpack what's really happening behind these headlines. So thank you so much, Major Lowsen, for taking time out from your busy schedule and joining this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Anand. I'll do my best to help.
So, Major Lawson, my first question is, how should we interpret the arrest of Ashley Tellis? Is this an isolated security lapse, or is it a part of a deeper pattern of Chinese intelligence targeting US policy circles?
At this point, I think it's important to say that in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. I think that's the case in most democratic countries. And so we don't know what Mr. Tellis may or may not have done. As far as spying and intelligence collecting, obviously that happens between countries all over the world all the time. However, when you have an overtly hostile foreign power like China towards the democracies, you're going to see a lot more of it. So it's possible that this is a manifestation of that. It's possible it's something else. A couple of interesting points here. Mr. Tellis apparently had classified documents that he kept at home, which is illegal if that is the case. So nobody should be doing that. And also, apparently, he had contact with Chinese embassy and perhaps other officials. And in many cases, I think that's a normal thing for a scholar of China to do. Mr. Tellis was a scholar of China, somebody I actually very much respected. I'd read his books and been to events with him, so I did respect his opinion very much. And it's possible, going back to the FBI China initiative a few years ago, that it may be that law enforcement is being a little bit overeager in targeting persons of foreign origin. That's a possibility as well. And the last point that I'd make there is that the U.S. District Attorney in this case, her name is Lindsay Halligan. She was just appointed last month by the Trump administration and gained a lot of fame for indicting both Comey and Bolton for what might be sort of questionable grounds, unquestionable grounds. And I think normally in our country, you can't say, well, it's a political prosecution. That defense never works in our courts. However, because Mr. Trump and the administration have really been putting their thumb on the dial thumb on the scale here in favor of these prosecutions, that may actually work. So it is possible that Mr. Tellis's arrest and prosecution are part of that dragnet somehow. So we were speaking earlier how he may have fallen afoul of the BJP. Maybe he's also fallen afoul of President Trump. I don't know. But these are all things to look at. He's innocent until proven guilty. And so I think we'll have to wait for the truth to out.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but if we look at this aspect of political vendetta during the Trump 2.0, but the fact of the matter is that the surveillance on Ashley J. Tellis started during Biden's regime. So do you think, that could basically, and it's a process of continuity as far as the national security aspect is concerned. So Biden, for our viewers, he was a Democrat president, Trump is a Republican president, but the process which started during Biden's administration, so it seems to be coming to a logical conclusion during Trump administration. So how do you look at this political vendetta aspect in context of these facts?
Well, it may be, as you suggest, the investigation having been started already. This is simply a matter of law, and he was found to have been violating the law, and they proceeded accordingly. I think, though, with Lindsay Halligan, there's always the shadow now of a political prosecution. And why did we choose now to indict as opposed to before? So I don't know. It may be all according to the process. It may be that Lindsay Halligan, quite apart from any political sort of leanings she has simply has a slightly different take on when to prosecute and when not to, and is going forth here. I think the thing to watch is who is convicted, if anybody.
So we'll come to the Silicon Valley investigation by the Times also. But just one more thing, because you have served in a sensitive position, like you have served in Beijing, and you know the intricacies of the military kind of strategies, as well as the diplomatic aspects of it. So is it a very normal thing? But the prosecution has filed in the court in case of Ashley Tellis case. So they have said, he was meeting the Chinese people, he was taking Manila envelopes, and then when he used to come out at times, that Manila envelope was not there with him, and sometimes he used to come out with gifts. I just want to, without being value judgmental about it, because it could have been anything. In the Manila envelope, it could have been the hard copies of his articles or anything. So not necessarily confidential material, or maybe confidential material also, so we don't know. But is it, given your experience, is it a normal thing, because he had the security clearance at the highest level? For is it a normal thing for people like him to go meet the Chinese, what you call diplomats, or people from Chinese embassy, which often we know are basically Chinese spies? So is it a normal thing? In if we look at your part of the world, like in the US context.
Well, I might disappoint you in your answer, but it depends on the situation. So when Mr. Tellis was working for the Bush Jr. administration on the National Security Council, I think it would have been a very normal thing. And as he went forward from there and became a researcher with noted research institutes, I think that would have been a very valuable thing for him to do, is to meet with Chinese officials. Now, the character of those meetings, it might even be normal to exchange his articles, as you say, or something like that. Would not have been normal to exchange classified documents in any sense. That would have been illegal and very troublesome and bad. So I do think it very much depends on the specific circumstances and what exactly was going back and forth.
So now let's come to this Times investigation about sex warfare in Silicon Valley. So are these Chinese? Let's talk about the largest Chinese spy networks. So are Chinese spy networks really using seduction as a new tool of espionage, or is this just a modern spin on the Cold War tactics? But you might be saying the Cold War 2.0 between US and China.
Yes, in fact, there's a great history of this in China. They have one of the 36 stratagems. That's one of their key strategic, I don't know, it's a collection of idioms. And one of the strategies is called Meirenji, which means it's what we would call the honeypot, the beautiful person strategy. So you're trying to seduce somebody with a beautiful, beautiful woman or a beautiful person, or else at least compromise them in some ways. And so this has been updated into the Soviet period as Russian spies or Soviet spies work their way into things like family networks within the US. And they're raising complete families here and just fitting in as American citizens, except they have this connection to the Soviet Union and that they feel duty bound to send information back there. So bringing it up to today, we see the PRC using perhaps these tactics, certainly these tactics, or at least trying to use these tactics for IP theft, stealing intellectual property, stealing military secrets, so benefiting both their industrial sector and their military as they can. I think one of the main parts of the Times story, which I think was very good, is that it highlighted some of the other ways in which China was spying as well, because the Meirenji, the honeypot strategy is not necessarily that effective, not necessarily even the most effective. We live in a digital age where the information is available and we're struggling to guard it. And so I think there are many ways to get after it, of which trying to compromise people in salacious sexual affairs is one of them, although not even necessarily the most effective.
So, why, kind of course, we understand why Silicon Valley, but do you think Silicon Valley, if you look at it as basically, strategist, as, somebody who has, again, I would say, has worked in, Beijing and has extensive experience of, dealing with such issues. So how do you look at, Silicon Valley in terms of the money, kind of money they have, the innovations which they do? So is it really so vulnerable? And if so, what needs to be done?
I, I think electronic media are inherently vulnerable if they're connected to the internet. So, really, I think it's a matter of understanding the problem. The threat is out there. I think there are two different worlds. I think there's a free world, and I think there's a not free world. And I would perhaps politically incorrectly call it the slave world, especially considering Chinese forced labor practices. And these two worlds run on completely separate rule sets. In the free world, we have rule of law. We have a way to hold people accountable. In the slave world, there's no such rule of law. There's no way really to hold people accountable except by force. And so Silicon Valley is not does not have military. It's not does not use force. So it needs to be aware of the threat from the authoritarian world, and it needs to take steps to harden. And then we understand, like everything from castles in medieval Europe to armor and armor-piercing weapons today, it's a struggle back and forth. So it's a question of first realizing the threat and then reacting to it. And I think there's a significant role for government assistance to industry in hardening themselves against these threats.
Uh, So how actually, potent is this threat of the Chinese espionage network, globally? Because we have seen, a very interesting thing as, in our earlier conversation, I had mentioned, I had done a series on the Chinese spy network. So one of the most interesting thing which I came across was that the whole world, especially the so-called mainstream media, they talk about Mossad, they talk about, the Indian and Pakistani intelligence agencies, they talk about CIA. But nobody even talks about, the Chinese, espionage network and the Chinese, intelligence agencies. Most of the people, I think 9.9 out of 10 people, 99 out of 100 people you'll ask, they won't even know the name of the Chinese, intelligence agency. So, how they have been able to keep this under the wraps, despite having, kind of penetrated almost every section of the society. There have been multiple books on it also, that how the Chinese influence operations run. So, how do you look at it, sir?
I think that's a very interesting question. The In some ways they have been exposed, I think. There have been great exposés in the New York Times in the past about the counterintelligence network that the Chinese ran within their own country. And I think one important aspect of Chinese spying, especially Chinese communist spying and their Ministry of State Security, is that it's not strictly a foreign affair. It's an agency that has probably as much or maybe even more purview within China as it does outside of China. And so we see it's almost part of society in many ways, just very well integrated through the Chinese Communist Party. And going abroad, you'll see it integrated into sort of Chinese communities abroad and working hand in glove with the United Front Department, and also the United Front work effort, which actually spans the entirety of the PRC government. So it's really a comprehensive effort that goes around the world. And I think you maybe see dribs and drabs, although perhaps of reporting on it, although maybe your point is a good one that we don't see nearly enough because it is a massive effort. It's a hostile effort. And it is an effort that really does attack our industrial complex. And I think the most salacious aspect of it, maybe sort of these pretty young women going around propositioning people, and you see this all the time on social networks like LinkedIn. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg and the most obvious portion of a very large apparatus that has been, the PRC has been honing this for a very long time.
So we know that, there's this Five Eye network which shares intelligence, in which, US, Australia, and Canada, and there are a couple of more countries. But like in South Asia, India and China are rivals. So, does there exist, basically? I'm asking a very naive question, from a layman's perspective to an expert. Given the a little bit of a kind of a rough situation between US and India off late, but there seems to be a great potential for sharing the intelligence between US and India, especially when it comes to Chinese affairs, because we know that there's a Tibet issue, and then there's the East Turkestan issue, and so. Uh, how much of intelligence sharing happens between democracies which are there, like in West and in South Asia or in other parts of the world, especially between India and US, in terms of facing the Chinese threat.
I think it is a profitable avenue in the future, and I think it will continue to expand. I mean, of course, India is an independent, and it has a history of an independent great power, and it has a history of being non-aligned. And I think there's a culture there. So there may be, it may be that we're not quite aligned to have a Five Eyes type relationship, but I think in the future you'll see a great deal of growth there, particularly as the People's Republic of China continues to exhibit threatening behavior. So I think it's a good field to be in.
So how do these, espionage tactics of China fit into China's larger strategic playbook, to dominate tech and information ecosystems globally? So how does this, this Chinese espionage network fits into that?
I really appreciate the way you frame that in terms of tech and information, and I'll take those two sides separately. So on the tech side, they're stealing IP to support industry and their military. And we see their industrial program through Made in China 2025, which they briefly rolled out in 2015, and then they simply stopped talking about because in itself it's a major violation of World Trade Organization rules. It's not something they should be doing at all. And they were just publicizing it. So clearly they want to have these 10 industries and to be world leaders in these 10 industries, things like medical technology and robotics. And they have their national champions that they're supporting through government subsidies to make that happen. And part of that building that would be spying and stealing of IP. We also see perhaps I would almost say less innocuously, but just at a smaller scale, the China Standards 2035 program, where they'd like to dominate the technical digital industry standards through 2035 by inserting their own standards in there and making themselves and their industry as the sort of baseline, which would give them a great advantage. So they're being very smart about that. However, it is a big threat to democracies along all those fronts, especially to the military and in the technical or in the industrial sector. And I think this is something that she would like to exploit to gain a strategic advantage. However, I think the important thing to remember about Xi is that he's very much security focused. So uh, I think he's still sort of running on the head of steam that he received coming into China. And the desire of the Chinese people to grow economically and of those big Chinese conglomerates. That still exists, but Xi, I think, has tamped down on it to a great deal with his programs of security and demanding that everything serve national security. I think this is the primary fight in the economy, and we see it going back and forth between uh, the the economic forces like the National Development and Reform Commission and Xi Jinping's own inherent securitization of everything.
So that
On
going,
the info side,
yeah,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, no,
And let me just switch briefly to the info side.
no.
I think we don't. I think there's some common misunderstandings about what Xi Jinping and the CCP would like on the information side. In fact, what they would really like is for everybody to be towing the party line and saying, "Well, Taiwan is a part of China," just like so many people have done in Hong Kong. And I think as a proposition for the free world, that's not a good one. So, as much as she would like to use these technical and industrial advantages to dominate the information environment, I think his expectations are so high and so out of alignment with reality that in the democratic world, it's bound to fail.
Sir, one more question I want to ask about this information warfare, especially the Chinese dominance in the information sector. So, there have been, investigations and there have been reports that the Chinese have deeply penetrated into universities in the West, think tanks, then even Hollywood. So their frontal companies have bought, kind of basically several prominent Hollywood companies. So they are everywhere, and then they are Confucius centers. So in fact, India did not allow them to open Confucius Center, but I believe US has a large number of Confucius centers. Canada has a large number of Confucius centers, which basically analysts in our part of the world consider to be the recruitment organization or one of the hubs of the Chinese espionage network. So, we don't see much coverage of issues like East Turkestan. We don't see much coverage of issues like Tibet nowadays in the global media also. So is it basically because of the Chinese influence operations and the Chinese penetration in various, various tools of, information?
To the extent that coverage of East Turkestan and other issues has been suppressed, I do think the Chinese influence network has played a strong role in that, and that certainly includes the Confucius centers you mentioned. I would note that in the U.S. we have removed nearly all of our Confucius centers, so mostly they are gone now, which is a good move. I think India has been very wise to ban TikTok and the Confucius centers as well. I think that is important to limit that influence. Otherwise, as you mentioned, it can fly in right under the radar. And before you know it, you have all of these operations happening in your own country. For China, it's a very cheap investment. It's simply sending people. They have a lot of people, and they can train them to speak foreign languages. So they send them abroad, and they conduct these operations. It goes beyond that, far beyond that as well, with students. So in major universities, you also have the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, which is sort of a PRC aligned club within each university where there's any significant population of PRC citizens. So, and you see some of the same insidious influence operations happening there, as well as coordination with the PRC embassy. So, I think it's important to see it as a multi-front effort, and there is an educational front to it. These are educational institutions, but they are also propaganda institutions, and so there will be tie-ins with United Front Work and the United Front Work Department, and tie-ins with quite possibly the PRC embassies and their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and their Ministry of State Security, their lead spy agency.
Sir, my last question is that going way forward, so what should democracies, tech firms, universities, think tanks, they need to do, to protect their interests and their people, their intellectual, assets, without, kind of getting too paranoid, basically. So there's a very thin line between the two. But uh, do you see any collaborative effort happening on this front? Do we need a collaborative effort? So what do we need to do?
I think maybe the best example of a collaborative effort was well, first of all, the predecessor in the State Department's, U.S. State Department's Blue Dot Initiative, trying to strengthen countries as they received Chinese investment, strengthen them with legal measures. But beyond that, we had an effort to warn especially Europe, but countries throughout the world of Chinese technical intrusion skills through industry. So Chinese PRC investors were investing around the world, buying parts of companies, and then getting to steal the intellectual property and also insert their standards into those industries and those companies. And this was also, I believe, through the U.S. State Department. With our initiative, we actually went around and warned European countries. We shared, the information, perhaps even intelligence that we had on these illegal activities, and we thus hardened them to them. And we saw in many cases, for example, I think 5G is the most illustrious example where China would like to have sold their illegally government subsidized 5G equipment around the world, and that did not happen. It happened in some places, but in many places, especially in free countries, it did not happen because we warned them and we showed them what the problem with that was. So I think that really is the model. It's a model of information sharing and trust building and really understanding that there's a big difference between the democratic world and the slave world.
No, I had said, I'm asking the last question, but I still have, I'm tempted to ask one more question from you. Especially, people from our side of in our part of the world, they want to understand it. How do you look at the US ecosystem of think tanks? Because, US is a pioneer in terms of the culture of think tanks. In countries like India, now there is a conversation going on that if you really want to be a big influencer on the global stage, you need to follow, that culture. You need to have that kind of a culture of think tanks, and a lot of new think tanks are coming up in India and in other parts of the world also. So, but after this Ashley Tellis case, so how do you look at? I'm just making it a point of reference, but uh, How do you see this? Has this ecosystem, there are questions about it? I'm purely looking at it from the Chinese influence perspective because, as you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of people who come to US from China. They study, they join the think tanks, and then there is soft paddling. There is subtle paddling of issues. So, how do you look at this overall? Is there a discussion or debate within the US about the ecosystem of the present ecosystem of think tanks that it needs to be reviewed?
Well, with the case of Mr. Tellis, if he did do something bad, I think this would have to be an outlier within our, if he did commit a crime, this would have to be an outlier within our think tank community. It's not something you see normally. I mean, normally think tank personnel are professionals. They're, if not the best paid people in their industry, they do all right, and they oftentimes go back and forth between the government and the think tank, and you see this, and industry as well. They have those industry tie-ins, so they are able to go to private industry at a certain level, and if they need to make a little more money, that might be the way to do it. I think the sort of special sauce or the secret to our think tank industry is their independence, so that even the most sort of politically funded think tanks at a certain level still have to show that they're nonpartisan. Unless they're explicitly partisan, they're nonpartisan, and they're actually trying to do real research into a subject that is important, or subjects that are important, and provide information. It might be from a certain perspective, but it's good information they're providing, and it's a sort of extension of our universities. Many of the things they write are similar in quality and character to university level research. So it is high quality research. It is from perhaps funding sources that universities would never have the ability to take advantage of. So I think in some, it's a very positive thing. I think if there were any widespread issue in it, it is something that Congress could take issue with, or the industry itself could crack down on with its own standards, and just making sure, security-wise, that we are aware of threats like the PRC and dealing with them appropriately.
Thank you, Major Lawson, for again, your deep insights. And as always, it's a very enlightening conversation. And thank you so much for again taking time out from your busy schedule and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you, viewers, for watching this episode. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Anand.